And I would now ask Donya on stage. Donya Alinejad is a former colleague of mine from the PERITIA project, where we worked together on trust in science and expertise. And she's a media researcher with a focus on digital media and has studied the role of social media usage in people's experiences of spatial mobility, community formation, emotional care, and scientific knowledge communication. And I think is now going to tell us something about how social media platforms shape the communication about scientific expertise around politically contested issues such as climate change and COVID-19, which has been the focus also of the PERITIA project. So, Donya, I'll put your slides up here, and then you're free to this one. Excellent. You can use that one on the mic, or?
Yeah, no, then I'll
do the slides.
do the same as
Okay.
the trend was set. Thanks, Daniel. Thank you very much for having me here. My name is Donya, as Daniel kindly introduced me as. I am an assistant professor and media researcher at Utrecht University in the Netherlands. And I'm here to speak to you today a bit indeed about social media environments and their role in public controversies. Based on the research that we've done, indeed in the PERITIA project on policy, expertise, and trust. And within that project, myself and Professor José van Dijk really focused on the role of the changing media landscape. So we're really talking, and what we mean by the sort of what we're talking about when we're talking about the changing media landscape is really the sort of growing power of social media platforms, not only in the wider media environment, but also society at large, sort of various different sectors that are being also integrated, infiltrated by the influence of social media platforms. So we're going to look a little bit at the case of COVID-19 and climate change. This particular case that I'm going to talk about brings them both together. And I'll say a little bit more about what we found there. This discussion that we had was with sort of a colleague of mine that we came together and collaborated to come up with the latest publication that we just sort of brought out of the PERITIA project. And it's published in Public Understanding of Science, a journal in the field. And I think it generated some insights that we can use here about how scientific knowledge and expertise becomes politicized when it enters the digitally mediated arena of public contestation. And I think that has some sort of maybe connection points that we can explore potentially for understanding how and how polarization works and how sort of addressing it and thinking about depolarization. So I'm sort of hopeful that we'll find those points of relevance. So in this work, we identified this main, let's say, challenge. Can we make a meaningful distinction between science that's politicized in a, let's say, healthy way and sort of societally healthy way, and science that's politicized in more of a sort of toxic or more unhealthy way when it comes to public democratic engagement and deliberation? We build here on literature that points out that some degree of politicization of science is necessary in knowledge societies, especially when we see an increasingly close relationship between science and policy. And so there's a sort of a degree that we have to not only accept as inevitable, a degree of politicization that we have to sort of accept, but also actually sort of promote and sort of consider good for public deliberation. Because we want to avoid the kind of technocratic discussion and decision making that excessively depoliticizes how science informs policy. But on the other hand, we also want to avoid what we call that toxic or unhelpful politicization of science that makes deliberation and contestation very difficult in the opposite extreme, because it sort of politicizes scientific knowledge and expert claims to the point where I would say basic sort of common ground starts to erode when it comes to sort of agreed upon knowledge and epistemic authority, facts, etc. So I would say this kind of politicization of science and expertise is sort of more conducive to the polarization that we want to avoid. So that's how we sort of conceptually framed the challenge that we're working with and sort of started to look at it within the media, the social media environment. So what we show, what I will talk about here and what we show is that in the Dutch context, we have a sort of set of data that we collected in what was then known as Twitter, and so we use it as a case to think through this conceptual distinction that I outlined. And we show that in this instance, on the basis of this data, on users who were actively tweeting about climate change and COVID-19, the first form of politicization of science that we saw was something we could that we could define as contestation, meaning tweets were bringing the two issues together and sort of using rhetoric around the two issues and the policy decisions that were being made around them to sort of contest decisions that were being made by those in positions of authority. That took place exclusively within the blue cluster, and that blue cluster is associated with mainstream press, scientific, sort of authoritative scientific bodies, and leading parties, main sort of political party leaders' accounts. So the latter two clusters were associated with what we draw in the literature to talk about as ideological science rejection. And so what we saw there was more, not so much the contestation of policy, but really sort of targets of the expertise and the science and the scientists themselves, sort of really drawing attention to reasons to distrust what was being claimed. And these latter two clusters were really sort of associated with right-wing political leaders and groups, and that was the purple cluster, and the green one were really sort of conspiracy websites and accounts of important, let's say, influential conspiracy theory leaders that had emerged in the context of the COVID-19 pandemic in the Dutch press. So what we saw there happening in that latter cluster in particular was sort of these claims being made about alternative science and dissident scientists not being listened to and not being included in the public discussion. So we sort of thought, okay, let's look into what these alternative claims are. And we saw that within the tweet content, again, in line with this political clustering, we see that, for instance, so the websites that we have here from the halfway point down are associated with the mainstream press and political tweets. And from the halfway point up are the right-wing and conspiracy tweets within those clusters. And so those bottom half are really sort of government websites, mainstream press websites, various national news channels, and government websites. And the top half are various conspiracy websites, but also notably social media platforms, YouTube and Medium key among them. So we see how sort of the clusters, the political clusters that are associated with politically motivated ideological science rejection are really moving away in terms of just the sources that are being used from the rest of the sort of the mainstream, let's say, the political mainstream. Their sources are really themselves diverging from each other. So what we sort of should take away from this, I think, is indeed that we do have these different kinds of politicization, but that doesn't mean that we need to use that distinction between contestation and rejection to exclude anybody from the political discussion or the public debate. I think that's important as an implication to sort of take on board. What I think it is useful for is really just understanding the nature of the disagreements that are happening, where exactly they are happening, how we can characterize them, and also then I would say if we want to take something away from this, sort of to keep controversy about policy in the realm of policy disagreement and make as much sort of bandwidth possible, as much space possible for that sort of healthy contestation to take place so that you don't sort of see it channeling into sort of a breakdown of that common ground that we no longer can sort of see any basis for meaningful discussion and meaningful disagreement, actually. So that's what I have to share with you today. Thank you.